Hi guys, and welcome to our model on the peritoneum. Now, as a form of continuation to the model on abdomen, we're talking about the peritoneum. I'll be using this particular table of contents to discuss the peritoneum. We'll talk about different types of peritoneum, from periapical to visceral, and we'll talk about some derivatives of the peritoneum. This includes the peritoneal reflections, folds, fossas, and we'll end this model by talking about the peritoneal cavity. Now, every cavity within the body has some form of membrane that tends to line the walls and organelles found within them. The peritoneum is not any different. It's a continuous blistering transparent serous membrane that is found within the abdominopelvic cavity and tends to line the walls of the cavity alongside the organs and viscera found there. Also, function of the peritoneum is it provides a slippery surface for movement of the viscera. It contains various phagocytic cells, which helps in the protection of the viscera. So alongside it, it's providing physical protection for the viscera. There's also provide immune protection to the viscera. The peritoneum is capable of storing large amount of fat, as you will see some derivatives of the peritoneum, particularly made up of large amount of fat. The mesothelial cells of the peritoneum can transform into fibroblasts, which helps in healing if there's an injury or inflammation to an organ. Then the mesothelium tends to act as a semi-permeable membrane. In fact, we use this when performing a form of dialysis we call the abdominal dialysis, intra-abdominal peritoneal dialysis, in which we make use of the mesothelium of the peritoneum in filtering out blood and helping in excreting or metabolize like urea out of the body. So these are just the major functions of the peritoneum that we need to know. So aside being a surface membrane that lines visceral and lines the body cavity, it also provides some protection, either immunological or physical, and it also tends to serve as other forms of storage and aids in the healing process as shown in the slide. The peritoneum contains two major layers, the parental peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum. As you can see in the image on the side, the visceral peritoneum is the part of the peritoneum that lines the organs and it is shown in blue. Just look at this image, you can see that the visceral peritoneum in blue lines one of the organs here, which is the liver. The parental peritoneum, on the other hand, is the peritoneum shown in red. It's involved in lining the abdominal pelvic cavity as shown in the image. Between the parental peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum is a large space called the peritoneal cavity. I will focus on the peritoneal cavity later on in this model. What are the derivatives of the peritoneum? The peritoneum has a number of derivatives that you need to know. This includes the peritoneal flexions, is further broken down into the mesenteries, omentum, and the peritoneal ligaments. Then we have the peritoneal folds and then the peritoneal fossa. We'll talk about each of them as we move on this model. And what are the content of the peritoneum? Peritoneum contains viscerals, and these viscerals are divided into four different types based on their relationship with the peritoneum. So we have what we call the intraperitoneal organs or intraperitoneal viscerals. These are viscerals that are completely surrounded by peritoneum. Emphasis on the word completely. Then we have the interperitoneal organs. These are organs that are mostly covered by peritoneum, so they have some hard that tends to lack peritoneal coverage, but the majority of the aspect of that viscera is covered by peritoneum rather. Then we have the retroperitoneal organs. These are organs that are covered only in the anterior surface by peritoneum. They're called retroperitoneal because they are found behind the peritoneum, retro in terms of behind backwards. And then we have the subperitoneal organs, the organs that are surrounded by peritoneum only at their superior surface. We'll talk about examples of each of these organs in the next slide. So this is just an image showing us particularly the intra and then the retroperitoneal organs. You can see intraperitoneal organs are surrounded by the are organs surrounded by the peritoneum, whereas retroperitoneal organs are organs that have the peritoneum only covering the anterior surface and not the posterior surface. So examples of intraperitoneal organs would include organs like the stomach, the jejunum, and a part of the duodenum called the duodenal cap, the ileum, the cecum, the appendix, the transverse colon, the sigmoid colon, and the spleen. These are all intraperitoneal organs. For the retroperitoneal organs, we like to use the acronym or mnemonic SAC FUCA to remember the examples of organelles called retroperitoneal organs. We have organs like the suprarenal glands or the adrenal glands. The aorta and the IVC are also considered as retroperitoneal. The rest of the duodenum, aside the duodenal cap, the pancreas, the ureter, the ascending and descending colon, the kidneys, the esophagus, and the rectum are all classified as retroperitoneal organs. And like I said, the acronym or mnemonic SADCAR, SAD, then PUCKR is the proper mnemonic we use in rendering the organs classified as retroperitoneal. For interperitoneal organs, we have organs like the liver, the gallbladder, and the uterus. These are organs that are almost entirely covered by peritoneum, except for some aspects of the organs that lack peritoneum. In the case of the liver, a popular site is called the beer area of the liver. Then we have the subperitoneal organs, the organs that are only covered superiorly by the peritoneum. They include the urinary bladder and the upper one third of the rectum. Greater peritoneum is the peritoneum that is involved in lining the surface of the abdominopelvic wall and the lower surface of the diaphragm. It's loosely attached to the walls of the extraperitoneal connective tissues. And what we need to remember about the greater peritoneum in distinction to the visceral peritoneum is in terms of its nerve supply. The nerve supply is with that of the overlying body wall, and as a result, this nerve tends to be pain sensitive. And this is in distinction to what we see in the visceral peritoneum, as we see in the next slide. For visceral peritoneum, it is involved in lining the surfaces of viscerals. It cannot be stripped from the visceral, so it is part and parcel of the visceral. And in contrast to what we see for the parietal peritoneum, the visceral peritoneum tends to have its nerve supply being derived from the underlying viscera. And as a result, this type of nerve supply tends to have less pain sensitivity when we compare it to the greater peritoneum. That is why whenever we have issues with an organ, like an organ pathology, the pain that comes from an organ pathology cannot be compared to the pain that comes whenever we're having a surface pathology, like a skin pathology or a wall pathology in the abdomen. So we talk about the peritoneal derivatives. The first peritoneal derivatives we'll be focusing on will be the peritoneal reflection. Peritoneal reflections are complex folds of peritoneum that tends to interact and interconnect the abdominal viscerals with either one another or with the abdominal wall. And the examples of peritoneal reflections include reflections of folds like mesentery and mesocolon, lumentum, and peritoneal ligaments. We'll talk about each of these types of peritoneal reflections in the next slide. Let's start with the mesentery. Mesentery or mesocolon is a double layer of peritoneum. Is emphasis on the double layer that tends to occur as a result of the imagination of the peritoneum by an organ. This constitutes the continuity of the visceral peripheral peritoneum, so it's a mixture of two of them. And the primary function of the mesentery is to connect the organ that it is surrounding with the posterior abdomen. I'll show you pictures of how this looks like, but just remember that reflections could either connect organs to each other or connect an organ to the abdominal wall. In the case of a mesentery, it is involved in connecting the organ and its wraps with the posterior abdominal wall. The second function of the mesentery is to provide a means for neurovascular communication between the organ and the body wall. And as a result, mesenteries tend to have a core of connective tissues that contain blood and lymphatic vessels, nerves, lymph nodes, and fat. The different types of mesenteries that we need to know. The main mesentery is the mesentery that connects the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. It's a broad, fan-shaped mesentery that is about 15 centimeters long, and it tends to be directed obliquely. It runs from the left side of L2 to the right side of the sacroiliac joint, and it crosses a number of different structures. The second mesentery is the mesoappendix. The mesoappendix, as the name implies, is the mesentery that wraps around the appendix and connects the appendix to the posterior abdominal wall. In terms of shape, it is a triangular shaped mesentery and extends from the terminal part of the ileum to the appendix. It contains the appendicular artery that this artery runs in the free margin of the mesoappendix. Then we have the transverse mesocolon. Transverse mesocolon is involved in connecting the transverse colon to the posterior abdominal wall. Transverse mesocolon is a double fold of peritoneum that's involved in this particular connection. And finally, we have the sigmoid mesocolon. Sigmoid mesocolon is the mesocolon or mesentery involved in connecting the sigmoid colon to the posterior abdominal wall. It is V-shaped and it has an apex, and it is located in front of the left ureter and the division of the common iliac artery. These are pictures of each of the mesentery slash mesocolon that we mentioned. On the lower aspect of the image, you can see the main mesentery of the small intestine. You can see how it tends to wrap around the wrap around the small intestine and then extend all the way back towards the posterior abdominal wall, as shown in the image. Then in the image above, this is the mesocolon or the uh, transverse colon. And in this case, you see how it is connecting the transverse colon towards the towards the posterior abdominal wall. And finally, towards the right hand side, we could note the mesocolon of the appendix. This is the appendix there, and then the mesocolon of the appendix shown in this image is connecting the appendix to the posterior abdominal wall. Shown here, but we could identify it using this particular image is the mesocolon of the sigmoid colon somewhere around the spots. So the sigmoid colon of any mesocolon or sigmoid mesocolon is involved in connecting sigmoid colon towards the posterior abdominal wall. The second peritoneal reflection is what we call the omentum. The omentum is a multi-layered extension of fold. Emphasis on the multi-layered. This is distinct from what we talk about the mesentery, which is double layered. It's a multi-layered extension of fold that passes from the stomach and proximal part of the duodenum to adjacent organs in the abdominal cavity. And then we talk about the types of omentum we have. We have what we call the lesser omentum and the greater omentum. The point is that the omentum, besides being multi-layered, connects the duodenum and stomach to other organs or connects them to the posterior abdominal wall. We'll talk about each of the different omentums we have and the peculiar organs that they are interconnected. And this is a picture showing us different types of momentum we have. We have the lesser momentum and the greater momentum as shown. We'll talk about each of them, but just to quickly summarize, the lesser momentum tends to connect the stomach and the duodenum all the way up to the liver, whereas the greater momentum tends to connect the stomach and duodenum down to the transverse colon. So lateral momentum is a two-layer fold of peritoneum, emphasis on the two layer, and it tends to connect the liver, particularly connecting the liver at the portal hepatis to the stomach and duodenum. It connects the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach and to the superior part of the duodenum. There are two parts of the lesser momentum. These two parts are formed by two peritoneal ligaments. They include the hepatogastric ligaments, that's the part that is connecting the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and then the hepatoduodenal ligament, the part connecting the liver to the superior part of the duodenum. This is the image of the lesser omentum in a better perspective. As you notice, there's a connection between the liver and then the stomach and duodenum. It's shown in the image. The connection here is made by the lesser omentum. You can see that for the stomach, the part of the lesser omentum that is connected to the stomach is the lesser curvature that it tends to meet with, and that is called the hepatogastric ligament. It runs all the way up to the liver, particularly at the portal hepatis of the liver. Whereas the part of the duodenum that is in connection to the liver through the hepatoduodenal ligaments, as shown here, is the superior part of the duodenum. So this combination of the hepatoduodenal ligament and the hepatogastric ligament gives us the lesser omentum. The greater omentum, whereas, is a four-layered fold of peritoneum, emphasis on the four-layered, and is the part of the omentum that connects the stomach at the anterior curvature to the transverse colon. It is also regarded as the policeman of the abdomen. Remember when I was talking about the fact that the peritoneum could be used as a site of storage and also function in terms of immunologic protection. What I was referring to the most was actually the greater omentum. The greater omentum contains a large amount of immune cells, and as a result, it is involved in fighting infection. If infection occurs in the intestine, plasma cells found in the lymph nodes combat the infection and helps to prevent it from spreading to the peritoneum. And that's the largely one of the major functions of the greater omentum, aside its covering or connectivity between the stomach and the transverse colon. For that reason, we call it the policeman of the abdomen. Another thing to note about the greater momentum is the fact that it contains large storage of fat. As you can see in the image below, the greater momentum contains fatty streak or streaks of fatty tissue, and as a result, it serves as a storage point within the abdomen. When describing the greater momentum, we describe it as being a four-layered peritoneum that extends from the stomach to the transverse colon. And what I mean by four layers is the fact that the connection of the greater momentum has four major layers to it. Two of the layers tend to ascend, the other two layers tend to ascend. First two layers, layer one and layer two, you can see it commencing from the stomach and descending down towards the lower part of the abdomen. And at some point, the first two layers will turn over themselves, becoming the next two layers, the layer three and layer four. And then the third and fourth layer will run or ascend all the way up to the transverse colon to connect the transverse colon. So as a result, this form of orientation forms a drape-like configuration within the abdomen. And that's practically how the greater omentum tends to form. Let's talk about the last type of peritoneal reflection, called peritoneal ligaments. Ligaments are double layers of peritoneum that tends to connect organs to one another or to the anterior abdominal wall. Largely, peritoneal ligaments are ligaments that tend to connect organs to each other. We have very few peritoneal ligaments connecting the organs to the abdominal wall. So these are the types of peritoneal ligaments that we have within the abdomen, and it's important for you to note what they are connecting to. What, for example, the falciform ligament is a ligament that connects the liver to the anterior abdominal wall. The coronary ligament is the ligament connecting the liver to the diaphragm. So these two ligaments, the first two ligaments are involved in connecting the organs, the wrap around with the uh, with the abdominal wall. But the hepatogastric ligaments connect the liver to the stomach. The hepatoduodenal ligaments connect the liver to the duodenum. The combination of these two gives us the lesser momentum, as we saw in the previous slide. The right gastrophrenic ligament that connects the stomach to the diaphragm. The gastrophrenic rather connects the stomach to the diaphragm. The gastrosplenic connects the stomach to the spleen. The splenorenal ligament connects the spleen to the kidneys. The phrenico-splenic ligament connects the spleen to the diaphragm. And then the splenocoelic ligament connects the spleen to the transverse colon. Let's talk about the peritoneal folds. Peritoneal folds are reflections of peritoneum that are raised from the body wall by underlying blood vessels, ducts, or obliterated fetal vessels. There are three major peritoneal folds. Each of these folds tend to be found beneath the umbilicus, and as a result, we tend to have the tag of umbilicus to their names. We have the median umbilical fold, and that's the fold shown directly in the middle here. Then we have the medial umbilical fold. Medial umbilical folds are just pairs of folds lateral to the median umbilical folds. And then finally, we have the lateral umbilical fold found at the side. So starting with the median umbilical fold, this is a single fold. It extends from the umbilicus all the way down to the apex of the urinary bladder. It is a fold of peritoneum that is formed by the um, presence of the medial umbilical ligament. So that medial umbilical ligament raises the peritoneum and then forms a fold. So if you imagine the peritoneum having a straight part, if there's a structure underneath the peritoneum, that structure is going to be raising the peritoneum as shown in this image. And that raise that we see there is what we refer to as the peritoneal fold. So in the case of the median umbilical fold, the structure raising the peritoneum is the median umbilical ligament rather, and the median umbilical ligament is the remnant of the urachus. For the medial umbilical fold, these are pairs of folds to the right and to the left. They are located lateral to the median umbilical fold, and this fold is formed by the presence of the medial umbilical ligament. Now, the medial umbilical ligament is the remnant of the obliterated umbilical arteries, and that's what is giving rise to the fold. Finally, we have the lateral umbilical fold. These are also pairs of folds on the right and the left side. They lie lateral to the medial umbilical fold, and these are folds formed by the presence of the inferior epigastric artery, as you would see in the next slide. Now, this is an image of the folds that we just mentioned. The peritoneal folds, like I said, are located just below the umbilicus, each of them starting at the direct point of the umbilicus and extending downwards. And as I said, they are formed by the presence of either a vessel or obliterated fetal vessels, or the presence of structures or ducts that are located um, underneath the peritoneum, and as a result, they tend to form that fold underlying the peritoneum. For the median umbilical fold, this is the median umbilical fold here at the center. You can see how it extends from the umbilicus to the urinary bladder, and it is formed by the presence of the remnant of the urachus called the median umbilical ligament. Whereas for the medial umbilical folds, you can see the pairs of folds on the right side and the left side lateral to the median umbilical fold. This is formed by the presence of the obliterated umbilical artery, and this artery is going to be forming what we call the medial umbilical ligament. Then finally, on the lateral aspect, we have the lateral umbilical folds, right and left. These are folds formed by the presence of the inferior epitaxial artery and veins. As you can see, these two neovascular structures on either side tend to give rise to the fold we call the lateral umbilical fold as shown on the screen. Because we have a combination of five major folds, the median, the medial, and the lateral umbilical folds. Between these folds, we have spaces that tend to form pouches or recesses, and these are referred to as the peritoneal recess or fossa. So the peritoneal recess or fossa are pouches of peritoneum that tends to be found in between or beside the peritoneal folds. So the three in number, we have the supraapsical fossa, the medial umbilical fossa or medial inguinal fossa. We could either call it inguinal or umbilical. And then we have the lateral inguinal or lateral umbilical fossa. Starting with the supraopisthical fossa, this is the fossa that lies between the median and medial umbilical folds. It's a fossa that is formed as the peritoneum reflects from the anterior abdominal wall onto the bladder. This fossa tends to change in terms of movement of the bladder. So if the bladder is full, the fossa tends to be absent or pushed a little bit forward to make it flat. Whereas if the bladder is empty, the fossa is more prominent. This fossa is the potential site for a type of hernia we call external supraumbilical hernia. The medial inguinal fossa or the medial umbilical fossa is one that lies between the medial and lateral umbilical folds. This is also referred to as the acidox triangle. It's the potential site for what we call the direct inguinal hernia. Then finally, we have the lateral inguinal fossa. Lateral inguinal fossa lies just lateral to the lateral umbilical folds or lateral inguinal folds. And this is a fossa that contains a very important structure to the inguinal region called the deep inguinal ring. We talk about that under the module of the inguinal region. And what last thing to note about the lateral inguinal fossa is that it is the potential site for a type of hernia called indirect inguinal hernia. This is the image that shows for us the different fossas of the peritoneal recesses, and you notice that between the medial and median umbilical folds, we have this space here. This is the supraorbital fossa shown here, and you can see there's a fossa that reflects upon the bladder. So the fossa is affected by the emptiness or the fullness of the bladder. And laterally between the medial and the lateral umbilical fossa and folds, we have what we call the medial umbilical fossa. And then finally, lateral to the lateral umbilical fold, we have the lateral umbilical or lateral inguinal fossa in this image. Let's complete this particular module by talking about the peritoneal cavity. Peritoneal cavity is a potential space that lies between the peritoneal and the visceral layers of peritoneum. It contains the thin layer of liquid or fluid that keeps the peritoneal surface moist. This is referred to as the peritoneal fluid. Peritoneal fluid is um, is the fluid that is secreted by the mesothelium of the peritoneum. Peritoneum consists of mesothelium, which is a simple squamous layer of epithelial cells, and these cells tend to secrete peritoneal fluid. The fluid lubricates the peritoneal surfaces, it enables the viscerals to move over each other without friction, and it allows the movement of digestion for the intestines found there. The fluid also contains leukocytes, antibodies, and these are involved in resisting infection. It is absorbed by lymphatic vessels on the inferior surface of the diaphragm and eventually taken out of the peritoneum. This is to ensure that we don't have a lot of peritoneal fluid present within the peritoneal cavity. In males, the peritoneal cavity is a closed sac In females, whereas there is a communication between the exterior and the uterine tubes, sorry, the exterior and the peritoneal cavity through the uterine tubes, the uterine cavity, and the vagina. And as a result, this constitutes a potential pathway for infection from the exterior. Peritoneal cavity is divided into two major sacs. We have what we call the greater sac and the lesser sac. These sacs are connected together by a small window or small opening called the epithelial foramen, or the foramen of Winslow, also called the omental foramen. This is the image of the entire peritoneal cavity and its division. You could see the larger peritoneal cavity in pink shows the greater sac, whereas the smaller peritoneal cavity in blue shows the lesser sac. And the connection between them is at this point here. This is called the Winslow, the foramen of Winslow, or the epiploic foramen. The greater sac is the main and larger part of the peritoneal cavity as shown in the previous image. It is further divided into two subcompartments called the supracholic compartment and the infracholic compartment. What tends to foster this division is the transverse mesocolon. So the part of the greater sac above the transverse mesocolon is called supracholic compartment. The part below the transverse colon is called the infracholic compartment. And when we make a surgical incision through the anterior abdominal wall, the first part of the abdominal cavity, peritoneal cavity, we meet is the greater sac. The greater sac is also connected to each other to via the parapodic quarters. We'll talk about that later on in the model. As you can see, the image here shows us the subdivision of the greater sac. The lesser sac is still shown in blue in this image, and you can see the foramen of Winslow connecting it to the greater sac. The greater sac, whereas, is subdivided into a supracholic compartment. You can see it's a compartment just directly above the transverse colon, and then the infracholic compartment in yellow is the compartment that is below the transverse colon. Once again, the division of the peritoneal cavity here is shown in different colors. You will notice that the greater sac, first of all, is divided into two parts: the supracholic compartment above the transverse mesocolon, and then the infracholic compartment in pink below the transverse mesocolon. And then finally, we have the lesser part shown in blue in this image. The supracholic compartment, I said initially, lies above the transverse colon. It is connected to the infracholic compartment through what we call the paracholic quarters, and it is further subdivided by the liver into two subspaces. This is called the subphrenic space, which is the space below the diaphragm but above the liver, and then the subhepatic space, the space below the liver but above the transverse vesiculum. In this image, you notice that the supracholic compartment is further divided into species. You see that above the liver, we have the right and left subphrenic spaces, and then below the liver, we have the subhepatic space shown. The infracholic compartment, whereas is found below the transverse colon but behind the greater omentum, it is connected to the supracholic compartment through the paracholic quarters, and it is further subdivided into the mesentery, um, by the mesentery into the right infracholic space and the left infracholic space. What you see in this image is that if the infracholic compartment is being divided by this aspect of the mesentery shown here, and that division will form the right infracholic space at this point and the left infracholic space at this point. The right infracholic space is the triangular space. It lies between the root of the mesentery, the ascending colon, and then the right third of the transverse colon as shown here. So this is it. It lies between the root of the mesentery that I've drawn here. That's the dividing line, the ascending colon on the right side, and then the right third of the transverse colon and transverse mesocolon. So these are the boundaries of the right infracholic space. For the left infracholic space, it lies on the it's also triangular in shape. It's an inverted triangle in shape. It's rather triangular in shape. It lies between the root of the mesentery, the descending colon on this side, and the left one third of the transverse colon. These are the boundaries of the left intercolic space. It widens below as it is continuous with the cavities of the pelvis. You can see that unlike the right infraocular space. The left infraocular space is continuous with the pelvic region as shown in this image. Consider arrow pointing towards the pelvic region in this image. Connection between the infraocular and supracholic compartments is made by the paracholic quarters. Paracholic quarters are spaces that tend to interconnect these two set of compartments and they lie lateral to the colons. We have two paracholic quarters, the right paracholic and the left paracholic quarters. The right paracholic quarters lies just lateral to the ascending colon. So this is the ascending colon here. And this is the right paracholic quarters, the space just at the side. It connects the hepatorenal recess, which is a space that is found just between the liver and the kidneys at the back, to the pelvic cavity directly below, and it provides a route of spread of infection or abscess between the pelvic and the upper abdominal region. The left paracholic quarters, whereas is found lateral to the descending colon, so this is the left paracholic quarters. This connects or separates is separated from the area around the spleen and the phrenicopolyp ligament. So you don't have an extension or communication between the left hepatorenal recess here with the pelvic cavity because of this small ligaments called phrenicopolyp ligaments here. So that phrenicopolyp ligament separates the left paraplegic quarters from the hepatorenal recess. And as a result, that limits the spread of infection between the pelvic cavity or the lower aspect of the abdominal pelvic cavity to the upper aspect of the abdominal cavity. Let's talk about the lesser sac. Lesser sac is also called the omental fossa. It lies directly behind the stomach and its adjoining structures. And it is a sac that is connected to the greater sac through a small opening that we'll talk about next. That opening is called the omental foramen of Winslow. This is the image of the lesser sac, the mental fossa. You can see it's a blue sac that is uh, found directly behind the stomach and the adjoining structures around it. The structure that is found behind the stomach, where the lesser sac gets to separate the stomach from called the stomach bed. So this entire set of structures that just directly behind the stomach is called the stomach bed. It contains a number of structures, including the pancreas, the spleen, and other structures. But what you'd also notice in this image is the fact that the lesser staff is connected to the greater staff, which is in light blue, by this small opening. This small opening here is called the foramen of Winslow. Finally, let's discuss the omental foramen. This is also called the foramen of Winslow or the epiploid foramen. As said previously, it's the foramen connecting the lesser staff to the greater staff. It is the opening that is situated posterior to the free edge of the lesser omentum, or particularly the hepatoduodenal part of the lesser omentum. It can be located by running your fingers along the gallbladder to the free edge of the lesser omentum. And usually tends to admit about 2 fingers. The boundaries of the omental foramen are important to note, especially for your incos. Um, the omental foramen is bounded superiorly by the caudate lobe of the liver. It's bounded inferiorly by the superior part of the duodenum, the portal vein, the lymphatic arteries, and then the bile ducts. It is bounded anteriorly by the hepatoduodenal ligaments, which is the part of the lesser omentum, and the contents of the hepatoduodenal ligaments, which are the portal triad, the portal vein, the hepatic artery, and the bile ducts. And then finally, it is bounded posteriorly by the peritoneum covering the IVC and the right cruise of diaphragm. Let's talk nerve and blood supply. The nerve supply to the peritoneum depends on whether we're talking about perital and visceral peritoneum. As said before, the nerve supply to the perital peritoneum is coming from the adjacent body wall and diaphragm, and as a result, it is very pain sensitive. Whereas the nerve supply to the visceral peritoneum comes from the nerve innervation to the viscera, which are sympathetic innervations to the corresponding viscera. And as a result, this tends to have less pain sensitivity as compared to the peritoneum. For blood supply, the greater peritoneum is supplied by a number of blood vessels, including the number vessel, the musculophrenic vessels, deep circumflex vessel, and the branches of the inferior and superior gastric vessels. For the visceral peritoneum, the blood vessels supplied it will come from the corresponding visceral supply. So let's talk quickly about the clinical significance to the peritoneum. Number one, it will be as on the subject of ascites. Ascites is when we have excess accumulation of peritoneal fluid within the peritoneal cavity. And as a result, this will lead to distension of the abdominal wall. Then the second thing to note would be the flow of inflammatory abscesses. I mentioned a particular aspect of the peritoneal cavity called parabolic gutters, and especially the right parabolic gutters, where we have the communication between the pelvic region and the hepatorenal recess at the top. You could have spread of inflammatory access from the pelvic region all the way up from the abdominal cavity all the way down to the pelvic region. And this is made possible by the parabolic gutters. And then finally, we have intestinal obstruction. This is more dealt with under the topic of the small and large intestine, but in the case of the peritoneum, presence of different folds or different ligaments would lead to worsening cases of intestinal obstruction, as we'll discuss later on in the future. And that concludes our model of the peritoneum.